Many UK citizens like to travel, and there may be those who are considering a relocation, whether it be temporary or permanent abroad, or even following a digital nomad kind of lifestyle. In the past, especially within the EU, this was really straightforward for UK nationals up until about 2020 when, well, you know, the B word happened. Fast forward to today, and for UK nationals looking to relocate to the EU, it's a lot more complex, there's a lot more requirements, and it's a lot more bureaucratic than it was before. But not impossible. And as someone who believes in pursuing your dreams, overcoming obstacles, and maybe even changing course slightly if you have to, I'm here to tell you today about all of the different ways that UK nationals can still move to the EU. Let's get right into it. If you're new here, my name is Jonny. I'm originally from the UK, but I've been living and working in Spain for the past 4.5 years. I was one of the lucky people who made it out before Brexit, so I didn't have all of the paperwork that a lot of UK citizens who are trying to move over today are facing. Nevertheless, as someone who's passionate about global lifestyle and financial freedom, I do try and stay on top of things when it comes to different ways that people can move abroad and move to different countries, and particularly with what goes on in Europe. Prior to Brexit, the UK passport was one of the most powerful passports in the world. At its highest, it ranked second in 2015 according to passportindex.org. Fast forward to 2024 and the UK passport is tied fifth most powerful passport in the world according to Passport Index. UK passport holders today have visa-free access to 127 destinations around the world with a visa on arrival in 47. So that gives you access to pretty much 88% of the world visa-free or with visa on arrival if you're a UK passport holder. And despite the fact that the UK still has visa-free travel to the EU, there are now time restrictions on that. Before there were no time restrictions and it was very easy to register long-term as a resident. Now, if you're traveling to the EU, you can stay for 90 days in a 180-day period if you're a third country national, which UK passport holders now are. Otherwise, you will have to register for a visa for longer term stays. There's also the upcoming introduction of the EU's ETIAS scheme. Similar to the US ESTA visa waiver, people are now going to have to start filling out a form prior to traveling to the EU and pay a small fee in order to be able to travel to the EU going forward. Nevertheless, if you consider all of the visa-free destinations, you can still say that the UK passport is still quite a powerful passport to have. So let's get into some of the different ways that UK passport holders can move back to the EU today. I've categorized them into easy, medium, and hard based on how difficult I believe they are for someone to meet the requirements and to make it happen. So let's start with some of the easy ones. So despite there being visas and paperwork involved in pretty much all EU countries, if a UK national wants to move there, there is one where it's not the case, and that's Ireland. So Ireland and the UK share the Common Travel Agreement, which dates back several decades, basically which allows freedom of movement of each country's citizens within the other without visas, without restrictions. So an Irish citizen could come, live, work, study in the UK, and a UK citizen could live, work, study in Ireland. So Ireland can be a good option for someone who's looking for a destination with relatively close cultural proximity to the UK and, you know, geographical proximity as well, and you don't have a lot of the hassle of paperwork and bureaucracy that is the case in the other EU countries. If you want to move to some of the other EU countries, there is another way which makes life quite a bit easier, and that's if you have an EU spouse or partner. So if you're married to an EU national or you're in a recognized registered partnership with an EU national, then thanks to your EU partner's nationality, that can defer you residency rights as well. Now, there is still paperwork and an application process involved. You may even need to prove that you're traveling to that EU country for the purposes of joining to be with your partner. But once you're there and you're able to prove your registered partnership or marriage, it shouldn't be too difficult from there to register as a resident. And registering as a resident, as a family member of an EU citizen, you'll also get the right to live and work in whichever country you're both living in as well. Now let's move on to some of the medium difficulty ways that you can move back to the EU. So the number of people that might fulfill this criteria is less than the easy ones, and there's typically, you know, financial requirements in some cases, and you may need to have a certain set of skills, let's just say. Anyways, the first one is moving to the EU to study there. So if you're accepted into an EU university or a training course or program within an EU educational institution, then of course that will give you the right to move to that EU country as a student, and you'll have the right to work part-time as a student as well, in line with all other students in that EU country. And if you're looking to stay there longer term, then typically EU countries give you a grace period to find employment after your studies as well, ranging from 6 months in the case of countries like Denmark up to 18 months in the case of countries like Germany. But again, different countries have different levels of strictness in terms of what you'll need to do, what you need to prove, and how long you can stay. So it very much depends on where you go. And keep in mind as well that you'll typically only be able to seek employment in the country where you've been studying as well. Generally speaking, you wouldn't be able to, go to a university in Germany and then look for a job in Spain or France. You'd typically be looking for employment in Germany. So that can be a way to move over if you've kind of exhausted all other options that are available to you, and you're really struggling for ideas. Then this can be a way. Of course, studying costs money, so there'll be financial requirements, not just for the studies, but financial requirements typically in terms of getting your student visa that you can support yourself for the duration of your studies. Now the next one, although is not exactly moving to the EU, it is making your path to the EU easier, and that's getting an EU citizenship. So there are multiple ways to do this. You can get it through naturalization, you can get it through descent, or you can get it if you're married to an EU citizen as well. So naturalization will typically only apply to people who are living in the EU right now, because of all of the complications I've mentioned. If you're not already living in the EU, it's quite hard to get out there. But if you are there and you want to pursue a second citizenship, then going down the naturalization route, you can apply for an EU citizenship after as little as 5 years in the case of countries like France, Belgium, Ireland, Portugal, and all of these countries allow dual nationality as well, which means you'll be able to keep your UK passport. And then on the top end of the scale, you've got countries like the Netherlands, Austria, Spain, where the naturalization route typically takes 10 years before you can apply. And in the majority of cases as well, these countries don't recognize dual citizenship, so will most likely involve renouncing your UK citizenship. If you're married to a Spanish citizen and you're both living together in Spain, then you can apply for Spanish citizenship after just 1 year of marriage. In the case of Italy, it's 18 months. And in the case of Belgium, Germany, and Bulgaria, you can apply for those citizenships after 3 years of being married and residing in their countries with your spouse. You might be a lucky person who's entitled to an EU citizenship through descent as well. Actually, a lot of UK nationals have Irish heritage, and back in 2020 there were huge passport queues and backlogs in the Irish passport office because so many British nationals were applying for Irish citizenships. Worth looking into if you have parents, a grandparent, or even further back in some cases, and depending on the different nationality laws of each country, that may be a way that you can get an EU passport and then go down the simple route of moving back to the EU. So worth checking out. The next option is a very recent one, but it's popping up all over the place, both around the world and in Europe, and is digital nomad visas. So if you're a location independent worker, that means that you can work from anywhere in the world, or perhaps you're a remote worker, you're working for a company, and you again can be based anywhere in the world, but your employer is not based in an EU country. Then there are ways that you can apply for digital nomad visas, or long stay working visas as they're called in some cases. There are a lot of different EU countries that have digital nomad visas, but the income requirements can vary greatly by country. So on the lower end of the scale, you have the likes of Italy, Spain, Malta, Croatia, Latvia, Hungary, and Czechia. And the income requirements for these programs range from about 28,000 euros per year up to about 36,000 euros per year. So these are probably some of the more accessible ones in terms of income requirements. And then you got some higher income requirements such as Portugal, Greece, Estonia, Romania, and Cyprus, which range typically from 40k per year up to 54k per year. And so obviously not everyone can be a remote worker, and it is quite challenging to get started as a digital nomad and run your own business in your home country, let alone, doing it around the world. But as you can see, certain countries have more accessible programs in terms of income requirements than others. And keep in mind as well that typically the income requirements will be increased if you come in with family members and dependents, such as spouse or children. So keep that in mind too. And there'll be other requirements as well, typically a clean criminal record. There may be health insurance that's required. They may ask for certain proof of qualifications or a university degree in some cases. Okay, now let's move on to the hard category. So these are some of the harder, more challenging residency permits to achieve. So the first one is the EU Blue Card. So if you're a high skilled worker, you have skills that are in very high demand in a particular EU country or across the EU, then you can apply for an EU Blue Card, which is a highly skilled worker visa basically. And so typically what you can apply for and where you can apply for it will depend on the skill shortages and the skills that are in demand in different EU countries. But once you get the EU Blue Card, it is renewable up to a period of 5 years, which you can then get permanent residence from. So if you're in a profession where there's high demand for workers in that sector, or you think you could qualify as a highly skilled worker, America, then this is an option worth looking into as well. Next, you've got passive income visas. Now, these are typically for people who don't want to work, they may be retired, or they live off investments from property or, dividends or whatever. Think of the likes of Spain's non-lucrative visa program, Portugal's D7 visa, Greece, France, Austria, Cyprus, all have similar programs as well, with differing income requirements and definitions of what is and what isn't allowed in terms of, one, meeting the financial requirements, so whether it has to be through income only or whether it can be via savings, and two, in terms of, is economic activity allowed? Because in the majority of cases, it's not allowed under an investor visa. And then arguably the hardest way to get EU citizenship, because very few people have the economic capacity to do this, is via the likes of a golden visa or residency or citizenship by investment scheme. As I talked about in a recent video, the EU is very much against these golden visa programs, and there are very few of them still around. So typically in the past, one could make an investment in property, buy their home, and doing so with that property being over a certain value, it would grant them residency in an EU country. These kind of investment programs are being cracked down on heavily right now. So Spain is going to modify its golden visa program, as we understand, based on a recent video I did. Portugal has modified their golden visa. Ireland got rid of its golden visa program. To my knowledge, there are only 3 EU countries that allow you to acquire a property and then get residency as a result if it's over a certain threshold. And those countries are Italy, Greece, and Cyprus. So in Italy, from 250k upwards, you'll be eligible to apply for that scheme. In Greece, 250k, but it can be 500k in certain municipalities of Athens. And in Cyprus, from 300k upwards, you can purchase properties and then be eligible to apply for a long-term residency permit in these countries. And there is still one EU country that offers citizenship by investment, and that's Malta. So typically with an investment of 750,000 euros, but can range up to 1.4 million euros the whole process, depending on how you approach it, you can gain Maltese citizenship after just 36 months. So let's say in the EU, this is the only official citizenship by investment program, but of course, very, very high financial requirements, and not everyone is going to have the capacity to do that. There are 2 other residency by investment schemes, and that's Romania, which if you invest 50k into setting up a company in Romania, then that will give you residency rights. And in Bulgaria, if you invest 500,000 Bulgarian lev, which is about 200,000 euros, more or less, then that can also give you a right to residency in Bulgaria. As a bonus section, something I've learned over the past few years is that in Europe, there are countries that are not in the EU that are also very interesting and worth visiting, and that you can also access them by a lot of the options that I've talked about over the course of the video. So let me walk you through a couple of these. You'll see that I have videos about some of them on my channel as well. So the first one is Georgia. Georgia is growing in popularity, becoming more talked about, especially in the digital nomad circles. UK nationals can go to Georgia for up to 360 days without a visa. So that's almost a full year that you can go there and not have to register for a visa whilst you're in Georgia. Georgia also has a digital nomad visa, which is renewable after 1 year. And there's also a golden visa program for investments on property of $300,000 upwards. Minimum income requirements, by the way, for Georgia's digital nomad visa is 2,000 euros per month. Next is Albania, which is again growing in popularity. The Albanian Riviera is starting to make the headlines as a very, very beautiful place. I went to Albania just over a year and a half ago and had a great time in Tirana and Honduras as well. And Albania also has a digital nomad visa with very, very low income requirements as well. Only $10,000 per year is the minimum requirement for income under the Albanian digital nomad visa. Albania was also looking at a citizenship by investment program, but following talks with the EU, it was ultimately scrapped. Turkey is another popular destination these days, also has a digital nomad visa, very low minimum income requirements as well, a minimum of about 500 euros per month to be able to support yourself. $550 is kind of the proof you need to show that you can support yourself. You can also be eligible for Turkish citizenship when you invest in property with a value of $400,000 or above. So Turkey also has a citizenship by investment program. Montenegro, a very beautiful country on my list where I'd like to visit as well, also has a digital nomad visa and a golden visa program as well for investments of 250,000 euros upwards. Serbia also has a citizenship by investment program for 600,000 euros or residency by investment for 520,000 euros as well. And then the last 2 on the list within Europe, not within the EU, but almost certainly the most difficult to move to. So the first being Switzerland, where you could be eligible for a C permit with an investment of 1 million Swiss francs, or by starting up a Swiss company that can also give you residency rights lives in Switzerland, but it's probably minimum capital and income requirements as well. And the last one on the list is Monaco, where you need €500,000 kept in a bank at all times within Monaco. And of course, you need to meet income requirements as well. And Monaco is one of the most expensive countries in Europe to live in. So a very difficult one to get. So there you go, guys. I hope you found this helpful. I hope you found it interesting. I hope it's given you some ideas of how you can explore different ways of moving around the EU and possibly even outside when looking at that bonus section of the video as well. Leave a comment and let me know, have you explored any of these ways to move abroad outside of the UK, and which countries have you been looking at and down which route have you gone? So next time, I'll see you on the next one, and let's get this money.